Hello HEMA friends and welcome to this new video. Today we are going to talk about sword drawing. Let's start by saying that in our European tradition there is not a lot of emphasis on actions, techniques which are about sword drawing. There are a few of them, for example Fiore has one, but is really niche in its application, it is more about self-defense. There is also in Fiore again some actions which can refer to sword drawing, so the one-handed sword section, the sword in one hand section may refer to sword drawing, but again it is not specifically related to it and we can just guess that it may be also about this part of fighting. Now we know that in Japanese martial arts, for example, these kind of techniques, namely drawing techniques, are kind of prominent. There are a number of them, actually quite a lot of them, and many of them of course are meant to cut directly at the opponent from the draw. So why it is different in Europe? This is probably because of social and religious motivations. So the way in which social interactions were carried out, both in terms of peace and violence, were kind of different compared to Japanese one. So that's why most probably violence was regulated in a different way, and the situation in which violence would have been carried out again would be slightly different. Of course this is an assumption, we can't be sure about it, but to me it makes sense. Very good, so let's give a look to some drawing techniques. So as you can see, I am using an arming sword, more in the specific Oakshott Type 14 arming sword, which is pretty short, only like 70 more or less centimeters of blade, slightly more. So it is pretty easy to draw, simply because of this motivation. But generally speaking, it is easier to draw one-handed sword compared to two-handed sword, of course. Now, even if it is easy to draw, there are certain things which are harder to do compared to others, or better, we can make our life easier while drawing the sword, especially if you want to land a certain action from our draw, be it a parry or whatever. So if we draw our sword by standing upright in this kind of situation, of course we can draw our sword in this case because it is pretty short, but generally speaking it is the lesser comfortable position in which we can do it, and it is a position in which we can't really do anything from this kind of standing position. So ideally we want to move around while drawing our sword. So for example, if we want our tip pointing forward, the ideal thing to do is to move backward and draw our sword in this kind of way so that our tip is already pointing forward toward the opponent. This motion also let us maybe void something, which may be an ideal thing if someone is attacking us. Generally speaking, if we are at a point in which we have to void an action while drawing, probably we are dead. So it's not ideal. But generally speaking, if we want to take a little bit more time and draw our sword with the point forward, this is the kind of solution that we want. Another way of thrusting from the draw is, in this case, offensive, and we can do it by stepping forward with the front foot, so we gain a little bit of distance, we draw our sword and we instantly move the force edge forward so that we can redirect our sword with the tip online. So again, we step forward, we draw our sword, as soon as the point slips out of the scabbard, we redirect our tip forward and we thrust at the opponent. Now, of course, we can also cut from our draw, but it depends from which kind of cut we want to land, and depending from the length of the sword, certain cuts are easier to do or possible to do or not. So if I want to cut a Sottano, it is easier for me to drop down a little bit, which helps me arrive from below, draw my sword and cut directly from this kind of position. I am on guard, let's say. I move forward with my front foot, I do a little lunge, I draw my sword and I cut from this kind of position. Also, this step makes the action possible in one single movement. So like, simply because I am stepping forward and even more important, downward. Funny enough, in Italian, lunge is translated in affondo or a fondo, as it was said back in the days, which means going deep, so going low, basically. Now, if I want to cut a mezzano instead, which is another way of intercepting the opponent's sword, actually it is better by a certain point of view, depending from what the opponent is doing. We can't move forward or backward because, again, the same action we have seen before can be done by going backward if we need, but instead has to be done by moving sideways. So we need the space sideways to land our cut from the draw. So this time we can move left with our left foot and then cut from this kind of position. Or, if it is needed, we can move toward the right with the right foot and then cut in this kind of way. Now, by a defensive perspective, it is better to move toward the left because we have more space to intercept the opponent's sword. And then maybe we can thrust into it, which is something, it is the pattern of action that we see shown in Fiore, basically, in the one-handed section of Fiore, one-handed sword section. Now the other option is, of course, moving toward the right. In this case, we are trying to a certain degree, void the opponent action. We move toward the right. With our draw, we are not able to cut properly on the figure of the opponent. We maybe can cut at the opponent's hands by moving sideways, or we can parry with our tip so that we are going to yield, and this makes us able to enter and grasp the opponent's arms or the opponent's sword even, or whatever, depending from the distance, the situation, and what the opponent is doing. Of course, we are going to see these techniques in the future in an application video, but for now I just want to give a look to the movements which are useful to draw the sword together with you, so that you can, if you want, you can train this action by yourself in solo. Now, another possibility to defend ourselves, which is not quite reliable, but it can work, is parrying directly from the draw. So if an opponent is striking at us with a mezzano or a fendente or whatever, we can try to move sideways and draw our sword in this way so that we parry directly from the draw. It is a possibility. We are going for a direct parry very close to our figure, which means that if the opponent is at that distance and is not throwing a mandrito, fendente or mezzano, we are dead, because it is not possible to do many other things, if not this kind of parry directly at this kind of distance. Now, the last drawing techniques is pretty funny. Now, it is not related to anything in the specific, just for fun. If we have a relatively short sword, especially, we can draw the sword with the reverse grip, so that we are basically thrusting with a giant knife. Now, is this action useful to a certain degree? I actually don't know. There are certain depictions of people thrusting in this kind of way in certain images. I don't know how much they are realistic, but generally speaking is a giant knife, especially if it is a very short sword, and maybe if you need to do something very fast, this kind of thing may actually be useful. It's just a giant dagger, if you want to see this kind of sword in that way. Very good, people. We have seen a number of techniques to draw our sword. Generally speaking, by our competition side of the practice, they are completely irrelevant. But if we want to try and guess what it was back in the days, and we want to create some funny games, martial games, let's call them, in our style, in our gym, it's a pretty interesting field to explore, so I suggest you to try out if you enjoy these kind of things. Very good, people. I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to check my Patreon page, link in the description if you want to support me. Thanks for watching as always, and see you next time.